last 10 years. During that time we caught up most days for a beer and a laugh. Even when I moved to Jakarta 2 years ago, Sam would bring his laptop into the Elgin on a Sunday, about once a month, and I would have mine at my local. And Wilco, Sam, Noel and I would catch up for a virtual beer. A couple of months back when Wilco had told me the cancer had spread to his bones and the prognosis was not good, I told Wilco that I would be happy to move in and help him when the time came. I got that call on Wednesday morning after Wilco had a bad fall on Tuesday night. I got him into the hospital straight away and he seemed to rally for a couple of hours, noticing how cute the nurses were. His breathing deteriorated over Thursday and Friday. On Friday I had run some errands for him. He thanked me and unusually shook my hand, so I think he knew the end was near. As I was preparing to pick up Noel to visit him on Saturday, I got the call from hospital to tell me he had passed. He was attended by a doctor and 2 nurses as he went. When I got in, I was pleased to see the hospital had moved the other patients out of his ward, so he had some privacy in the moments after his death. I could also make some calls to start spreading the news and to say my goodbyes in private. On Saturday afternoon I met Noel, Robbie and Kevin at the Riversdale, and we decided that as he was donating his body to research and he was not religious, we would not have a service just this week. I have been in contact with his sister in the UK and a memorial service may be arranged down the track when his family can attend. Beyond his gruff exterior, Wilco always looked out for his mates. When I moved back from Jakarta and was struggling to find work, Wilco asked me to do his gardening for him. Don't get me wrong, Wilco could no longer do it, and he made me sweat and toil for it. But that gave me some beer money to enjoy some more laughs with him. On Wednesday he told me that he had 2 rules while I was staying with him. 1, I could not touch his gin, as that was about all he could keep down at the end. And 2, I could not sleep with his favourite barmaid Kelly in his bed. I regret to say I've only broken one of them. As gin is good for a good cry, and they took care of my Saturday night. I've learned a lot over the last few days about Wilco. I can't tell you the number of barmaids that have been in tears as I've told them the news. He was much loved and admired, as evidenced by all of you here today, with some flying in from interstate and travelling a fair way. I found a video at his place yesterday called Leather Master. Imagine my disappointment when it turned out to be about maintenance of his leather lounge. I was so impressed with the way that Wilco lived his last months. There was never a hint of self-pity. He enjoyed a laugh and a drink with his mates. He kept working longer than should have been possible, and that's the way I'll always remember him. Thank you. Now I'll introduce Nick, who's a cousin of his, who's going to read a letter from his sister in the UK. Thank you.
My name's Nick, cousin of Brian, and just been given these words tonight from his sister Val to read out to you tonight. So from Val, his sister, Brian and I were brought up in a small rented flat above a shop. The shop actually sold and stored ammunition for fairgrounds and was probably quite dangerous. We were relatively poor, as most families were in the vicinity shortly after the war. You learn at an early age to wheel and deal in order to make your life easier, as we certainly did. Locally was a head office and distribution yard of a small supermarket chain where each week they received deliveries of large cylindrical wooden boxes which contained 2 large cheeses. Brian and I were approximately 6 and 9 at the time, and we used to await these arrivals and beg for the wooden boxes. When we were lucky enough to be given more than 4, we thought we'd hit the jackpot. These boxes were then chopped up by Mum and provided us with wood for the fire. When our paternal grandfather died, Mum was left about £100 or similar. and this enabled us to buy a chalet. Well, apparently it was a small wooden shack on a campsite in Laysdown, which is the Isle of Sheppey. Every opportunity was spent in Laysdown, where Brian and I used to go cockling on the beach, as well as explore the island. It was a lovely, carefree time, which we loved, and I know Brian still had fond memories of. There is a road leading from the campsite to the sea, and on each side were amusement arcades. Brian and I used to hang around these arcades and quickly learnt the sequence of the slot machines, so we knew when a win was due, and would nip in quick to play the game and collect the winnings. This money was then used by us to buy comics. He was obviously not old enough to drink at the time, was he? Our Christmases were a happy, large family occasion. We always had a dance and a good sing-song. Songs from around that time were Knees Up Mother Brown, finishing with the Okie Kokie. When we were older, probably in our late teens, early 20s, this was followed by all the men settling down to a game of cards, which would go on throughout the night, the women having gone to bed. Needless to say, Brian wouldn't give up until he was the winner. Brian rang me one day from Phillips and Drew, which I presume is where he worked or something, I'm not sure, to ask if I could check where he'd left his E-Type Jag. He arrived home the previous night after a big drinking session and then gone to work the next day and remembered the Jag. Fortunately, it was safe in the garage, although I'd strung him along for quite some time. The E-Type was his pride and joy, I know, and years later he much regretted selling it. I believe he brought that E-Type over here as well when he... A few years ago I persuaded Brian on one of his visits to the UK to drive Mum, Alan, who is his cousin, and me to St Ives in Cornwall, so that Mum could visit the family grave where Dad, brother Tony, and Alan's dad, Mum's brother are buried. We spent several lovely days there wheeling Mum around in her wheelchair. The family plot overlooks the sea and is adjacent to the Tate Gallery. Mum's ashes will eventually go there too. It's my intention to have a plaque made in memory of Brian and placed on this grave so he can be near to Mum and Dad, which is what they've all wanted. There's some more comments here from Mick, which is Val's husband. I like this one. My abiding memory of Brian is of him leaving my abiding memory of Brian is of him leaving my family's pub in Bishopsgate after a lock-in about 3 AM with 15 pints of Guinness on board and insisting on walking home to his parents' flats at the Elephant and Castle, some 5 miles away. I just want to read some stuff. This is now, this is from my mum, Trisha, who is Brian's cousin. So she's in the UK as well. Some comments here. Brian, I'm sure you all know, was born South London, 6th of September 1946. He went to St Olive's School in Bermondsey, South London. Before moving to Australia, he lived with his parents, Tom and Alice is still alive now, and they lived near the Elephant and Castle in London. Prior to living there, the family lived in Swan Street above a shop, which Val was just talking about a moment ago. They had no bathroom. The tin bath hung on the wall in the garden, and once a week it got hauled up to the kitchen where every kettle, pot and pan went into action to boil the water to fill it. In later years, Brian used to laugh and said that his cousins, the Fitzgerald, were posh because they had their own bathroom with running hot water. One year, his Auntie Anne got married. The Fitzgeralds lived in Southwark and had a big firm's yard out the back. The reception was held there. The piano was wheeled out, beer was flowing, and a rip-roaring Cockney wedding was in full flow. All the kids, Val, Brian, Terry, Mo, Trisha, Maureen, Trisha, were plopped into the bath at the end of the day as they had been, running wild and getting pretty dirty. Brian took great delight in telling Trisha's daughter, VJ, on their first meeting that your mother and I used to bath together. Brian was a good-looking guy, always popular with the girls. We'll hear another bit tonight. At Trisha and Vic's wedding, he pulled a work colleague of Trisha's, Sandy, and he left the wedding early and took her home. Unfortunately though, he'd had a good drink and he fell into a deep sleep. But not before bolting the front door securely. His mum and dad then couldn't get in, so they had to go around to a friend's to sleep that night. So you can imagine the earful he got the next day. The last thing here is just talking about one of the places he used to work in was a wine cellar near London Bridge with his cousin Terry. So with Brian, that was a bit dangerous having him work there. The first time I met Brian was actually only 5 years ago, so I think a lot of you here probably known him longer than I have. But I've got to say, the 5 years that I've known him, I just wish I knew him longer. Great guy, Brian. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
What a fantastic turnout. Brian had a lot of good friends, and I think they're all here tonight. I'd like to thank some people. I might miss out on a few, but Steve Dammer has flown, only found out yesterday, flew all the way from Sydney to be here tonight. Langy, Ian Lang, from Far North Queensland, one of Brian's best buddies. And if I missed anyone else, I apologise.
Kay from Brisbane.
Hey, I haven't seen you. Hi, Kay.
Hi there.
This is my tribute. It's a hard act to follow after Hinchy, as you said so much about Brian and Mick. This is my tribute. Hopefully I can add something. This is my tribute to the late Thomas Henry Brian Wilkins. Born on the 6th of September 1946. He died on 3rd of November 2012, aged 66. Brian was affectionately known as Wilco. I first met Brian in the mid-1980s when I was at a fixed interest fund at National Mutual. And he had stints at Colonial Mutual, started in 1972, Macintosh, and various other places in the market. This is where he formed most of his long-term relationships. At first I knew Brian was not particularly enamoured with me, as he thought I was a prejudiced South African. That might have been right. In the early 1990s, I went broking, and Brian was one of the hardest clients I ever had to service. He was then state fixed interest manager at the State Insurance Office in Melbourne. I used to ring him every morning, give him a rundown of the market, and he used to give me a 1-point choice market in the bond and semi markets. If you try to deal on the 1-point choice market. He knew the flow so well it was impossible to ever do a deal with him. But I kept on trying. He then became an asset consultant, and he started to warm to me. And we developed a lot of mutual friendships. And a lot of his friends that are here tonight are my friends. In the mid-90s, Ray, Terry and I started Australian Indices. Wilco lost his job as an asset consultant, and we invited Wilco to join us and our team. As far as I know, Wilco delivered the first attribution analysis system in Australia, possibly in the world. It covered bonds, mortgage-backed securities, CPI-linked bonds, corporate bonds, floating rate notes, etc., etc. This system is still being used today in various disguises. Well done, Wilco. Towards the late 1990s, Wilco and I had developed a reasonable friendship. And he approached me for some background on South Africa, as he wanted to travel there for a holiday. This astounded me, as he always told me the place sucked. Although he'd never been there. In the interim, AI was dramatically downsized. As Joe Hockey, as Financial Services Minister, had withdrawn the ADX licence. That was the Australian Derivatives Exchange where we were getting our income. Due to them breaking their deposit covenants, they basically almost closed us down, and we all left, except for Terry, who's still running it. Ian Baster stepped in and offered Wilco the fixed interest portfolio management role, and the rest is history. He spent 12 years at UCA, and as far as I know, did a fantastic job. And that is witnessed by a lot of his colleagues, work colleagues that are here tonight. Wilco did his trip to South Africa and loved it. He particularly loved Plettenberg Bay, just north of Knysna, where I holidayed as a kid, and my parents retired there. Ples, as Walker called it later, had a particular attraction to him. He loved the place so much that he drove 600 kilometres from Cape Town back to Plettenberg Bay to check out the view, so I thought. I have it on good authority, it was not a scenic sea view he was after, but to see a certain young lady he had fallen in love with. It was sadly on his bucket list to go back before he died. He didn't make it. Walker had a very mathematical brain, but he loved chemistry and physics and always stole the show when we did the quiz. And Katie brought me today's quiz. Memory of Walker. I haven't looked to see if there were any chemistry questions on it. Over the last 10 years, Walker and I became really, really close mates. I'll miss him desperately, especially our bantering and his dry sense of humour. He had a lot of friends. Just look at this turnout. Walker was quite a shy person, but when he trusted you as a friend, he was loyal to the end. He was principled, kind, and always a gentleman. The bad side of Walker? Oh, he was the only golfer I knew who could throw the club further than he could hit the golf ball. Last year in Bali, a group of us went over, and Walker was never really, how can I put it, a groomed gentleman. But I managed to talk him into having a massage, a pedicure, a manicure, an ear and a nose job. And we'll stop there. He became a new sensitive male overnight. At this stage, I have to make a special mention to my other mate, Hinchy, who has cared for Walker not only in his dying days, but since he came back from Jakarta, he has been a tower of strength. Walker, on behalf of all your friends, we're going to miss you so much. Saturday at the Dale, Sunday at the Elgin won't be the same without you. Rest in peace. Thanks for all the good times and memories. I would like you all to raise your glasses and drink to the memory of Brian Thomas Henry Wilkins.
Brian.
If there's anyone else that would like to read out, I know Johnny James has got a tribute. I'd just like to read out a few other ones at Facebook. From Nicole Bryant, rest in peace, Wilco. Dad's good friend, what a true gentleman. May we all learn to be more thankful of our good health and respect of others. From my wife, Jim Bryant, sad, so sad with the passing of our friend Wilco. May he rest in peace. From Jean Strickland, the same. From my youngest son in New York, Greg Bryant, who we all spent last Christmas with Walker. We had him at our house with the family, and it was a fantastic day. And Greg said, we will miss him. What a terrific guy. Sydney Billingham Hoffmeyer, we'll be thinking of you at the sad time. So if anyone wants to read out tribute, Johnny, maybe, and I think Ian Lang wants to do something.
You probably can't hear me up the back there, I suppose, but my name's Ian Lang. I started work with Brian, well, he started work with me. I should say, when his first day after he arrived in Australia and after Lawsy hired him. Lawsy came out to me and said, we're going to need a fixed interest bloke. I think Ken, did you hear Ken? No. I think Ken Atchison had gone off to New Zealand, hadn't he?
He's gone somewhere.
Yeah, I think so. And Wilco was hired to be the fixed interest manager and I was his off-site. And we sat straight opposite each other in 1972. I got to know Brian pretty well. In actual fact, at that time, Noel brought up the fact that he devised a new attribution system. Brian did some other things in the fixed interest market that probably not many people were aware of. In 1972, we used to use bond tables to value bonds. They were books about that thick. And of course we had about our third worst government in at that time, and they had inflation really roaring in the country under Whitlam. The bond tables ran out at 8%, inflation was running at about 18%. So Wilco actually used to argue a lot with fixed interest traders about bond valuations, and in the end he was the bloke who introduced the HP80 into the Australian market for valuation of bonds. Up to that time we were using paper and very old-fashioned calculators. And that's when we got started to get proper bond pricing. Wilco came out here as an assistant market, $20 on a ship. He paid. Then one afternoon he said, I'll be just, can you look after things this afternoon just for a while? I've got to go out and do a couple of things. I said, what are you off to? He said, I've got to go down to the docks. I said, what for? He said, I've got to pick up the E-type. I mean, we're driving around in Holden, Valiants,
That's in 180.
that's in 180.
You were.
You know, and we'll go up to the docks and picks up his E-type jacket, convertible too, not even high-type. Beautiful car. It was a bit wrecked by the time we sold it. Yes, I've known Brian for a long while. I'm going to miss him a lot. I actually had an opportunity to talk to him on Friday afternoon. I got him to laugh. It was the same old laugh as always, that you all know. But even though he was struggling, he still was able to laugh. I'm going to miss him. And it drives home to me something else I said at another mate's funeral some years ago. Don't forget to tell those that you love them. Don't forget to tell your friends, if they're good friends, that they are good friends. Because you never know when they're just going to, 1 minute, disappear. And you get left with a better feeling knowing that you told them what you thought about them before they went, rather than regretting it afterwards.
Rose, I joined Colonial Mutual Investment Department about a few weeks after Brian in 1972. A couple of quick stories. Yes, Brian had an E-type Jaguar, and he tells a story about turning up at Australia House to fill out and pay his £10, and the guy's looking at him because Brian didn't have a top button on his shirt. The tie was down, didn't do the cuffs up, and he's at Australia House, and the guy's filling out this form, and he's saying, are you taking any personal effects? And Brian said yes, and he said, well, how much do you think your clothes and bits and pieces would be worth? And Brian said 50 quid, and the bloke looked at him and said, do you think that much? Anyway, it gets to car. I think Brian had to prompt him, and it says car, and he said, oh, don't suppose you got a car? And Brian said, well, actually, I've got a car, and the guy's about right down Morris Minor or something, and he says, E-type Jag. And the guy says, you can't take an E-type Jag! £10, and he won't be heard that, but he brought it out. And the story about driving to Brisbane's interesting in that Brian would go to Broken Hill one weekend, or Adelaide, or Sydney. He'd like to do this big drive. And then I remember him talking about the possibility of going to Brisbane, and we said, no, you can't get to Brisbane. Well, he did get there, and he brought a photograph of himself back to prove he had been there. Last bit of story is that Brian had kind of a wicked sense of humour, and he said it to us at one stage. It was April Fool's Day coming up, and we said, oh, we usually have a bit of nonsense in the office here, and Brian said, oh, you don't have decent April Fool's Day jokes like we do in London. And we thought, okay, Brian, we're going to get you. So we had a Scotsman working in Colonial Mutual, and we organised for the Scotsman to ring Brian up. And he said his name was Ian Johnson. Actually, he made the name up because he was the secretary of the Melbourne Cricket Club at the time. It was the first name he thought of. So this chap rings up Brian. He can only ring from 2 floors away. But he rings Brian and says, look, my name's Ian Johnson. I'm going to set up Global Pacific, some funny name, bond dealing association in Melbourne, and I've been told. In fact, I was thinking of Sydney or Melbourne, but I found out that you're the #1 guy in Australia, and if you took the job, we'd set it up in Melbourne. We pay very, very well. Would you be interested in having lunch? Brian said, yes, I'm just having lunch. And the guy said, look, there's a bit of an issue. I'm in town today, and I've only got this day here to do this lunch. But I'm going to be a little bit late, so I'll have to meet you at 1:30, and then you're okay to go out for lunch there? And Brian says, okay. And so Brian hadn't come to the cafeteria and had lunch, so the fellow said to Brian, look, you'll recognise me because I'm going to be in your foyer, I know where you are, and I'll be carrying a briefcase. So we organised for several people to be down in the foyer of the Colonial Mutual building at the time with briefcases, and Brian would walk up to one of these guys, oh, excuse me, you Ian Johnson, and the guy would say, unhand me, you fat fool, or whatever. So Wilco's all a bit stunned by all this sort of thing. And I can't quite remember how it ended up, but he missed lunch.
Which is a miracle in itself, I think.
So he didn't talk to us about April Fool's Day jokes again. Anyway, a really great guy. A huge honour to know him, and a very loyal person, and we'll miss him.
Well, I think that's all. Steve, you want to say?
Yeah, I'm going to stand up. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Steve Damerer, and I'd like to represent the somewhat younger generation that have been speaking to me.
Well, the under
I
80s.
think it's really important. I speak for guys like Jeff Melkin and Simon Van Ash and Warren Sanft and a number of the younger generation that are here. Oh, there's a few up, put their hands up. No, you're discounted. There's another side of Brian, and I remember that the HP80 was a great story, because I remember when I worked with Brian, he convinced me to leave JB Weir and Son to go and join him at Macintosh's and show me the flying ducks that used to go along the HP80 calculator. I thought that was fantastic fun. I had no idea what it meant, but it was fantastic fun. There was a side of Brian, there was a really paternal side to Brian, and I just wanted to talk for myself personally, and I know I speak for some others here, about the role he played in the younger ones. And how he helped us so much. I mean, from my own personal experience, I was a young man. We were getting paid far too much money to drink far too much and not do much work. But Brian was a really sobering. He was an amazing man in that he took us aside very much like an elder brother would, and directed us in terms of, guys, you've got to be sensible, you've got to think about buying your own house. And Brian took me, made me buy a house in Camberwell. It was fortuitously near him, which meant I could drive him to work every day. But there was a real side of Brian that no one's, I just like to really emphasise that he took a lot of young people, we're in our 20s, you know, we didn't really know what we were doing, and he brought a lot of experience with him. But he brought a really nurturing, caring part to him. And I think my memory of Brian is not of being a great person in the markets, not of being really intelligent, not of being a great friend, but my really great memory of Brian is being someone that cared for me personally, and I know cared for a lot of other people of my age and that time in the market, and nurtured us and cared for us and genuinely was concerned about where we went to and what he did with our lives. So he's not here, but on behalf of all of those people that I know are listening and those who aren't, I'd like to thank Brian. So thanks, Brian.
1972 as well. I was only 20 when I started with Brian, and he really took care of me. I had a first marriage, didn't work out, that broke up. Didn't know where I was going in my life. I mean, I worked with the most wonderful group of guys, and they're still friends today, which is wonderful. But then when it got to the point of what did I want to do, and Brian really encouraged me to go overseas. And he said, you know, do it, and then showed me how to actually pretend I was getting my bathroom renovated on my house to get more money out of the bank. which is how I managed to travel. And I did the trip through Europe and everything, and then I went back to London. I got a job at Potter Partners doing the telex at night. Most of you young people probably don't even know what that is. But I would use Potter Partners money to actually talk to Brian at night, because I was getting very lonely and I didn't know whether I wanted to come home, and he encouraged me to stay. As a result of that, I ended up over in New York as a nanny, because one of the Potter Partner people wanted a nanny, and I thought, well, why not? And long story cut short, I met my husband in Bermuda. I've been married to 31 years, and if it wasn't for Brian saying, stay there, I would have come back, and goodness knows what I would have ended up doing. So thanks to Brian, he was always there for all of us, and he was a very good friend, and he does have a very caring nature. I mean, I'm not in the market anymore, my life's totally different, but he was just always there for all of us, and cheers to Brian, and thank you.
My background is that I started off at Potter Partners in the research department many years ago. Was retrenched when the Poseidon boom and bust took its course, and I had a brief stint at the stock exchange in the investment research department. A few years later, I had an interest in a restaurant in Bridge Road, Richmond, and this very pleasant Englishman came in together with a very pleasing lady, sat down, and an argument broke out after a lot of booze and so on at about 11 o'clock at night. Anyway, Ken Fawcett was his name, and he turned to me and said, you know, I'd introduced myself by then, and he said, who do you support? I said, you. We've been firm friends ever since.